Dear honorable guests, scholars and friends, welcome back to the Tung Lin Kok Yuen 90th Anniversary International Conference with the theme Tracing the Threads, the Enduring Legacy of Buddhist Transmission, jointly organized by Tung Lin Kok Yuen and the Hong Kong Youth Center of Buddhist Studies. There will be 6 more presentations in the afternoon today, which will be conducted in English. Without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Catherine Hardy to welcome and introduce the first speaker of this section. Professor Hardy, please.
Thank you, Carol, and welcome back, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Professor Berthe Jansen, who will be speaking on the topic Gu Monastery as a Tibetan Buddhist Contact Zone, the Life and Legacy of the Mongolian Lama Sherab Gyatso. Berthe is Assistant Professor of Tibetan Studies at Leiden University. She has a PhD in Buddhist Studies, and she's also presently the PI of the ERC-funded project Locating Literature, Lived Religion and Lives in the Himalayas, the Van Manen Collection. This is a project that will run from 2023 to 2028. Her monograph, The Monastery Rules, Tibetan Monastic Organization in Pre-Modern Tibet, came out in 2018 with the University of California Press. She is also the author of a Buddhism-inspired children's book called Don't Kill the Bugs, and in addition to all of this, has been an interpreter and translator of Buddhist Tibetan since 2004. Please join me in welcoming Berthe.
Thank you very much for having me. I think I'll just dive right in because I have a lot to say. This is the first time I'm presenting on this topic, so you'll have to bear with me if it's a little bit messy. I structured this talk that I will first talk about Gu Monastery. What is it? Where is it? I'll talk about the founder of this monastery, Sherab Gyatso. Then I will move into presenting this autobiography that I found discovered, written by this founder, and kind of accidentally, while doing the research, I stumbled across another work written by the same figure. And then I want to show how this relates to our theme, to transmission, and also to sort of show that Gu Monastery at the time was kind of a center, a hub for all these different connections on all these different levels, and then I'll make some concluding remarks. Also, we have Sherab Gyatso in the middle here. And I will sort of have illustrated this talk or this PowerPoint with all these pictures of Sherab Gyatso because he may have well been at the time, so late 19th century, been the most photographed monk in the area, and maybe in sort of or at least monk in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. So I talk about contact zones, and contact zones, that's not my invention. Mary Louise Pratt has defined this as a term to refer to social spaces where cultures meet, clash, and grapple with each other, often in contexts of highly asymmetrical relations of power, such as colonialism, slavery, or their aftermaths. And one of the questions that I want to ask is, can we consider then non-normative and non-linear forms of Buddhist transmission through this lens, and then speak of Buddhist contact zones, so where you have actually a much more fluid notion of transmission as opposed to sort of the one-on-one transmission of Buddhist texts, philosophies, empowerment, what have you, or sort of the idea of lineage, but to have this sort of idea of that there is a zone, a place where people meet and learn and that kind of spreads out. So as opposed to this very neat idea, and here you have the Gelugpa refuge field, where everything is kind of structured in a nice linear way, rather than this, which is of course also going on at the same time. We're looking at something that is really quite complex, and we have to detangle. So let's move to Kum, and we also move to the place which is in itself a contact zone. So you can kind of see the in-betweenness of the place itself, Darjeeling, which was at the time, so we're talking about the mid to late 19th century, a place where you had sort of the British developing this as a summer kind of capital. You could take an easy train from Calcutta to Darjeeling, but you also have people coming in to work at the tea plantations from Nepal. You have traders coming from Tibet. You have people coming from Bhutan, and of course you have the Sikkimese. Obviously, it used to be a part of Sikkim itself, and then you have the local population. So you have a lot of religions, cultures, nationalities, ethnicities meeting in this place. It's a very diverse, very dynamic place. And then Kum is just a little village that is walking distance from Darjeeling. So actually the train stops there, you can get off, and you can very easily walk to this monastery. And the monastery that I'm talking about was actually already some sort of a tourist destination in the early 20th century. This is from an introduction to sort of travel in Darjeeling, where to go, and it gives a description of Kum, and it is said in 1922 that it was intended primarily as a place for political meetings more than a monastery. And this notion has kind of lived on in the representation of later scholars as well. So Emma Martin, for example, has said that it was a site for producing entangled forms of colonial knowledge necessary to develop a comprehensive picture of Tibet. So it was kind of the idea that it was a site where potential spies were educated who would then go to Tibet. And this is, of course, all in the greater context of the Great Game. And she also says it was already an open secret that Kum Monastery was a meeting place for many of those with an interest in Tibet. So I'm definitely not disputing that this was the case, but it was also a global hub. This is what I will argue in this talk, a global hub for, you could say, Buddhist modernism, but also a local site for that represented a sort of an authentic but also new kind of Buddhism, at least new for the region, because this is the first monastery in the region of the Gelugpa school. And also the idea of monasticism for the region at that time was not entirely common, let's say. So in that sense, for the locality, it was a new form as well. So let me take you to Kum. This is taken a while ago, but if you go to Calcutta, you could find a poster like this and say, well, please, this is a poster from the tourist agency. If you want to go and visit India, do visit this monastery and find what you seek. It is compared to many other Tibetan Buddhist monasteries in India and Nepal and Bhutan, it is rather run down. It is not central. It is not wealthy. And this is kind of what you see when you enter there. And do note the date of the establishment of this monastery, 1850. I'm going to tell you this is wrong, or it cannot be. And again, this is where you enter the monastery. Where you enter the monastery, 1850 again. And inside, there's a little notice, again, established 1850. This was, as I said before, this was a monastery that was already kind of well-known to Westerners, and people liked to visit it. It was also well photographed, so this is a photograph from 1934. And of course, I mean, this is an area where there's quite a lot of wear and tear, so you'd have a lot of renovations were always necessary, so the architecture changes quite a bit. But kind of in line with what I'm arguing is that Kum was, by Westerners, not just seen as a site for tourism or a site for learning about Tibet in order to fulfill any sort of colonial schemes, but it was also a place where spiritual seekers came. And one prominent figure is Lama Anagarika Govinda, and he stayed in Kum Monastery for a while, and he had some spiritual experiences there, and he claims to have actually lived in the main temple. And in his book, The Way of the White Cloud, which was of course hugely influential to many people with an interest in Buddhism, he actually has a little map drawn of the inside, which is actually still pretty accurate, sort of with what we see today. But let's this is sort of moving forward. Let's move back and look at the founder of this place. He has different names. He's often called Sokpo Lama, the Mongolian Lama, Sherab Gyatso. And again, we have here a very famous picture that you will see again. And the other image is the clay statue within the monastery that is built based on one of these pictures. So what do we know of him? Actually, according to Western sources, we actually have quite a bit of information about him. And what we learn is that he was an informer to the British government. He lived in an area called Bemake for a long time, and based on the information that he had, the British were able to have an idea of the sort of where the Brahmaputra was flowing, but also the border area that they were particularly interested in. And according to some, he was a teacher of the Bhutia language, Tibetan language, to would-be spies and informants. And these are not my words, these are by Claire Harris. She has called him the poster boy for Tibetan Buddhism in Darjeeling, because he is on all these pictures, and he becomes kind of the quintessential Tibetan Lama, which is of course kind of ironic since he was not Tibetan. But he's also a founder of a monastery. He's known to have been a physician, astrologer, and even a teacher of the 8th Panchen Lama. He was the compiler of a dictionary. I will return to that later. And he was, beyond the shadow of a doubt, an important religious figure in Darjeeling. And as I'll show you beyond. So if I went to this monastery in November last year to look at sort of the legacy of this monk, and I asked the people there, and they have their own Facebook page, and they say, well, he is meant to have written these works, but these are lost. There's no physical legacy. There's nothing that belonged to him there. There are no known disciples. There's no lineage in that sense. There's no, in that sense, there's no transmission. But what I found was this. I found stuck between a number of other pages his autobiography. And I didn't find this in Darjeeling or in Kum, but I found this in Leiden. And then I have to quickly say a little bit about the ERC project that I'm doing. And this slide has too many words on it, I know. But what I'm doing now, and this is a 5-year project, I'm working with a collection, not just me, fortunately, other people as well, that consists of block prints, manuscripts, but also objects, and a number of what I call ephemera. So these are unfinished articles, pieces of paper, train tickets, bills, pieces of Tibetan writing that we have no context for. And these were all collected by the figure you see there on your right, Johan van Manen. And this was a Dutch person he lived in Darjeeling for a while, moved to Calcutta, and after his death, all his whole collection was moved to Leiden. And these are some of the questions that I'm asking, and in order to answer these questions, we need to know a little bit about the provenance. So this autobiography I found in the ephemera section. Totally unexpected. I was not looking for it, but there it was. It's relatively short, just 2 pages of almost A4 size. And it, as you can see at the top, written in English, it says, Lama Shirab Gyabtso, and then Namtar. And based on this autobiography, we can establish a timeline of his life before he arrived in Darjeeling. And that is exactly the kind of information that previous Western scholars did not have. So based on this, we can establish a timeline, and then we can actually find out that his actual ethnicity, there was always this debate about, was he really Mongolian? Some people call him Bhutanese, other people call him Buryat, but we know that he was born in Durbet, so he says himself it's a 3 days walk from Khoshot. He becomes a monk, starts his formal education. He makes some claims about his, not exactly realizations, but his proclivity to the Dharma. He's good at memorizing. And then he moves to Beijing and lives there for 8 years. And he says he lives in the astrological college, which is probably a subsection of Yonghe Gong. Then he goes back to Mongolia, travels to Amdo, where he lives for a number of years, and becomes a bhikshu. Then he wanders for a number of years in Amdo. He says, I tried to practice the Dharma, but nothing quite stuck. He moves for unknown reasons to Pemake and Gongbo, and he lives there for 12 years. And that's really quite an extraordinary thing. He writes very little about this period in his life. He then visits Lhasa, is asked to stay and work with the monasteries there, but he decides to go to Tashilhumbu and becomes a favorite of the Panchen Lama, which means he gets to do kind of sort of work for him, but we know from other sources that he was working as the physician of the Panchen Lama, also taught him some things, and as his astrologer. He also talks about printing text for the Panchen Lama, and he then receives his degree. He doesn't say what degree, but we know of the Tashilhumbu that they have the Gachen degree, which is sort of equal to the Geshe degree. And one of the annoying things about these degrees is that you're supposed to then give a lot of people donations. And he says, well, there were lots of Mongolians at the time, and they were all very friendly with me, and they all needed money, so I gave them money. He got into debt because he had to make all these donations. And he says, well, I had to go out and collect some donations, and then instead he ends up in Darjeeling in 1877. So how does he end up there? Obviously, he's in debt, so there might be some relation, sort of reason for him kind of fleeing the country, you could say. He doesn't say, but he does say this. When I got to Jansen, due to the sorcery of an obstacle-creating demon, I listened to the words of an Indian vagabond. So this phrase itself is kind of odd. And in the Fire Ox year, so 1877, I ended up in this barbarous land. Even though I achieved nothing due to the compassion of the gurus and the 3 jewels, and by relying on the kindness of benefactors, I have remained healthy and just about fed and clothes. Oh, I have only 1 minute left. That's terrible. And then he says something very interesting, I find, that he says, I have not become involved with the tenets of the foreigners, but I remained a Buddhist. And by the way, here you have him, here you have him, the second from the left. So in Darjeeling, he works with Chandra Das. Chandra Das seems to be the sort of center of his activity. He becomes a language teacher. He helps Chandra Das on his dictionary. I have to skip this. One of his former students, of whom we also have the autobiography in our collection, says very nice things about him. But I will skip this and show you kind of his importance that, and other people have written about this, that, of course, most people who have worked with Tibetan in some capacity will know this dictionary. So Tibetan, Sanskrit, English, really quite useful, not at all bad. Doesn't only give the name of Chandra Das, but here in Tibetan, we actually see the name of our Sherab Gyatso. And it says, compiled and elucidated by the great scholar, the Venerable Lama Sherab Gyatso. Another thing that I don't have time to talk about is the text that I found in the collection as well, which is actually probably might not have been technically written by him, but it was spoken by him and then put into print. And what is interesting about this text is that it is printed with a modern press, and you can see here what is very unusual about it is it has headers, chapter headers, which is not at all how normal Tibetan texts, what they look like. And this was actually used as a kind of a Buddhist primer in the school that he was teaching. So even this picture that you saw, it had was printed as postcards and distributed. So tourists would actually sort of send this to their friends. He was really he was some kind of model. He was very willing to pose for pictures. Chandra Das would take his picture here. So he's there at the center, and there he's the second from the left on the other slide. He was also a teacher to Eikai Kawaguchi, but Eikai Kawaguchi, also via Chandra Das again, decides not to continue learning Tibetan with him because Sherab Gyatso was more anxious to teach me the Tibetan Buddhism than the Tibetan language. So that's kind of what I want to argue as well here, is that he was not as much a spy or a Tibetan language teacher, but he was also really concerned with transmitting Buddhism. He was actually more of a Buddhist missionary. This kind of his fame culminates in this procession where the Sri Lankan embassy, which is masterminded by Anagarika Dharmapala, comes to Darjeeling with the relics of the Buddha, and there's a big procession, and the person holding the relics and giving the blessings is Sherab Gyatso himself. He gives a speech, and he talks about how this is the first public meeting between Buddhists of Tibet and Ceylon. So I don't have time to go into this, but if you kind of look to his kind of direct contact with people, it takes us all over the world. It takes us to, obviously, Tibet, to the Theosophists, to Western scholars, to British agents, to Japan, to Sri Lanka, Sikkim, all over the place, and also locally. And then if you look at Kuhn Monastery itself, it is very important in the early kind of days of contact between the West and Tibetan Buddhism. And these are just a selection of important figures that had close contact with Kuhn Monastery. So Kuhn Monastery today, and I was able to take the autobiography back to the monastery and present it to the monks there. They were very happy to receive it. Is in a less sort of glorious state than it used to be, and that's for a number of reasons. I would say that complex transmission histories, they lead to a loss of religious prestige. So if you can't easily kind of explain what happened, then there isn't that idea of, so this is a glorious history. Kuhn Monastery doesn't fit the mold. It's in between. It's not a monastery founded by sort of masters, exile masters. It doesn't really fit the local mold because most of the people locally are not Gelugpa, they are Nyingma or other. But despite that, he did have this great effect. I would say he was a Buddhist missionary, and he and his monastery influenced certain colonial agents, Theosophists, Western Buddhists, Buddhist modernists, local Buddhists, and everyone in between. So the question is, can we then speak of transmission because it is messy, or should we call this a Buddhist contact zone, so kind of a social space where cultures meet and clash and grapple with each other? And I would argue it is both. So that's where I'll probably have to leave it. So thank you. If you're interested in the project and what we do, there's a QR code with our blog website thing.
Thank you very much, Berthe, for that very rich and wonderful presentation. We have some time for questions for Berthe. Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I think my question will be quite obvious since we are from Buryatia. You mentioned that some researchers identify Sherab Gyatso as a Buddha. So could you please a bit more details about that? It's extremely interesting.
So the very annoying thing, and this is also where actually a lot of scholars have made a mistake, there was a person in Darjeeling at the same time with the exact same name. He was called Sherab Gyatso, but he was Buryat. And he's also known as Shabdung Lama. And so you have people conflating the Buryat Sherab Gyatso with the Mongolian Sherab Gyatso, which I fully understand. They only lived maybe 5 kilometers away from each other, were pretty much contemporaries, had the same name. And this Buddha Sherab Gyatso, he was an actual spy. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyway, it's only a short question. Thanks for this very rich and informative talk. And the Van Manen collection, how is it related to Kum Monastery? Is it simply one Namta inside this collection which is related, or many texts of this collection from Kum Monastery? It was not so clear, sorry.
Yeah, no. Thank you for this question. I didn't have time to talk about it. But there is a connection between Van Manen and here at the top right and Kum Monastery. He studied in Kum Monastery. This is where Van Manen started to learn Tibetan. This was after Sherab Gyatso had passed, but he learned from his student, Karma Sumdun Po. So in that sense, there is a so Van Manen learned from the student of Sherab Gyatso. And this is also the reason why this autobiography, it must be the reason why this autobiography is in our collection, and also why we have another text written by Sherab Gyatso in our collection. And my suspicion is, and I can't really, I don't really have enough evidence right now, I suspect that Johan van Manen actually collected some of the privately owned texts by Sherab Gyatso. So I think actually the collection that we're looking at, part of it is actually Sherab Gyatso's own texts. But I will be able to say something about this in maybe a year or so.
Thank you very much.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Very interesting. In fact, I was, because looking at the table here, of course, I saw Nicholas Röhrig.
Yes.
And, well, sure, because Nicholas Röhrig, he was also a complicated person.
Very.
Yeah, you just mentioned one Sherab Gyatso, and so, could you please just, be a little bit specific? I mean, Röhrig, what he was doing there? Because,
Yes.
I mean, he was searching for Shambhala, obviously,
yes.
and with the help of the relevant agencies, as we say from, so, I mean, is there any more information on what he was doing there? Yeah.
So yes, he was searching for Shambhala and he found it in Kum. No, I'm joking, but there is a direct connection there because, of course, another thing that this monastery was famous for, and this was only erected after the passing of Sherab Gyatso by Tomo Geshe Rinpoche, a very large Maitreya Buddha statue. And of course, Maitreya is connected to Shambhala when Maitreya, this is the end goal. And the other connection is Tashi Lumpo and the Panchen Lama. And the Panchen Lama, of course, this is a kind of a copy of the statue that they have in Tashi Lumpo itself. So Nicholas Röhrig, he was not the first one to make this connection, but he connected Shambhala with Maitreya Buddha, with Tashi Lumpo, and Tashi Lumpo's connection to this monastery. So it is kind of convoluted, but the connection is there. And he spent quite a bit of time in Kum Monastery, actually. Yes.
Yeah, and just to follow up, this second Sherab Gyatso, which you have mentioned, what is the timeline when it was?
Oh, so it's pretty almost contemporary.
The spy guy.
Yeah,
I mean.
the spy guy, the spy Shabtun Lama. He is almost contemporary. He lived a little bit longer, and he's also said to have accompanied a young husband to Tibet on his expedition.
Okay, so that's not relevant because there was another person there just about that time in the 20s, accompanying actually Röhrig's expedition, also masquerading as a Tibetan Lama, but in fact one of those, yeah, as you say, spies from all the way down from Moscow. Yeah, so,
Yes.
yeah, but that's really fascinating. Thank you very much.
Hey, please let's give another round of applause to Berthe.